The courtroom was not built for children. It was built for silence, judgment, and decisions that carried weight long after the doors closed. The wooden benches were tall and hard, the ceiling high and echoing, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and polished floors. Every sound felt louder than it should have been: the scrape of a chair, the cough of a nervous spectator, the quiet tap of a pen against a legal pad. And in the middle of all this seriousness sat a 4-year-old girl. Her feet didn't reach the floor. They swung slowly back and forth, brushing against nothing. She clutched a small teddy bear to her chest, its fur worn thin from years of being held too tightly. One ear was stitched back on with mismatched thread. She rubbed it absent-mindedly with her thumb, a habit she didn't even realize she had. No one had explained the courtroom to her. She only knew she had been told to sit still and be quiet. Adults were good at saying those words, but not at explaining why. Around her, the room was filled with grown-ups who looked tired, serious, or angry. Some whispered to one another. Some stared straight ahead. Others avoided looking anywhere at all. The girl watched them with wide eyes, sensing that something important was happening, even if she didn't understand what it was. At the front of the room stood a uniformed police officer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture rigid in the way that came from years of discipline. His expression was calm, but his eyes were alert, scanning the room out of habit more than concern. Beside him sat his K-9 partner, a large German shepherd with a dark coat and intelligent eyes. The dog lay perfectly still. Its body was positioned precisely the way it had been trained, alert but relaxed, head up, ears aware of everything. The leash lay loose in the officer's hand. Anyone who knew police dogs would recognize the posture immediately. This was a dog on duty, a dog that had faced chaos, danger, and unpredictability, and learned to master all of it. To everyone else in the courtroom, the dog was just part of the procedure: security, presence, control. To the little girl, it was something else entirely. The judge entered and everyone rose. The girl stood too, a second late, copying the movement around her. She nearly dropped her teddy bear in the process. When everyone sat again, she did too, careful now, pressing the bear tighter against her chest. The case began. Words filled the room, formal words, serious words, names she didn't recognize, dates she couldn't remember. Voices rose and fell in a rhythm that felt endless. The girl tried to listen, but it all blended together, like noise from a television left on in another room. Her attention drifted. She studied the patterns in the wood beneath her feet, counted the ceiling lights, watched dust float through a beam of sunlight near the window. She wondered when she would be allowed to leave. She wondered if there would be snacks afterward. Then, without warning, her gaze landed on the dog. At first, she only noticed how big it was. Bigger than any dog she had ever seen up close. Bigger than the neighbor's dog that barked at her from behind a fence. Bigger than the cartoon dogs on television. This one didn't bark. It didn't move. It didn't even blink much. She stared. The German shepherd's eyes were dark and focused, facing forward, but there was something about them that pulled her in. Something familiar, though she couldn't have explained why. Her fingers stopped fidgeting with the teddy bear. The room faded away. The girl leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing boredom. She studied the dog's ears, the shape of its face, the rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. Her small brows furrowed in concentration. Then something happened inside her. A feeling she didn't have words for. Not fear, not excitement, recognition. Her heart began to beat faster. Her hand loosened from the teddy bear and lifted into the air, slow and deliberate, as if guided by instinct rather than thought. She pointed. Not playfully, not carelessly. She pointed straight at the police dog. The movement was small, almost invisible, but it cut through the courtroom like a crack of thunder. A gasp came from somewhere in the benches. The judge stopped mid-sentence. Papers froze in hands. Even the quiet hum of the room seemed to pause. The officer felt it before he saw it, the shift in attention, the sudden stillness that didn't belong. His eyes followed the direction of the child's finger. The K9 was still lying down, still silent, still disciplined. But the dog's ears twitched, just slightly. The girl didn't lower her arm. Her eyes never left the dog. Her face held no fear, no confusion, only certainty, as if she were pointing at something only she could see. People began to exchange looks. Children weren't supposed to do this. Children weren't part of courtroom procedures. Children didn't point at police dogs in the middle of hearings. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to speak, but hesitated. The officer tightened his grip on the leash, instinctively ready to correct his partner if needed. Years of training told him to expect absolute stillness. What he didn't expect was what came next. The dog slowly turned its head. Not abruptly, not aggressively. Slowly. Its eyes locked onto the child. The officer felt his breath catch. This was not normal behavior. The German shepherd's gaze softened. Its body remained still, but its focus sharpened, not on the room, not on the judge, not on the handler, but on the small girl sitting several rows back, pointing at it with unwavering certainty. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but something had just changed. A connection had been reawakened. And nothing about this day would unfold the way anyone expected. For a few seconds, no one in the courtroom moved. The judge's gavel hovered in the air, forgotten. Lawyers stood frozen, mouths half open. The quiet was no longer ordinary courtroom silence. It was the kind that presses against the chest, the kind that makes people aware they are witnessing something they don't yet understand. The police dog continued to stare at the little girl. Not with alert aggression, not with confusion. With focus. The handler felt a chill run through him. He had worked with this dog for over 6 years. He knew every signal, every breath, every twitch of the ears, every subtle shift in posture. This wasn't a reaction to movement or noise. This was personal. "Easy," he whispered under his breath, more for himself than for the dog. The leash remained slack. The dog hadn't broken position, but its eyes, those eyes had changed. The sharp, professional focus had softened into something deeper, something layered with memory. The girl slowly lowered her hand, but she didn't look away. She leaned forward again, her small fingers curling into the edge of the bench. Her teddy bear slipped onto the floor unnoticed. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something, but no sound came out. She didn't know why her chest felt tight. She didn't know why her heart was pounding. She only knew that the dog was looking at her the same way it had once before, when she had been smaller, when the world had felt much scarier. A woman sitting beside the girl, her guardian, noticed the tension and gently touched her arm. "Sweetie," she whispered, "sit back." The girl didn't respond. Her eyes never left the dog. The judge cleared his throat again, louder this time. "Is there a problem?" The handler swallowed. He had answered that question many times before, usually with confidence and clarity. But now the words didn't come easily. "No, Your Honor," he said finally. "My partner is under control." The dog remained still, but its ears flicked once forward, then relaxed. The judge studied them both, then glanced toward the child. His expression softened slightly, though uncertainty lingered behind his eyes. "Let's continue," he said. The trial resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. People tried to focus on testimony, but attention kept drifting back to the dog and the child. Something invisible pulsed between them, something unresolved. The handler forced his gaze forward, listening to the attorney's questions, but his mind was elsewhere, back in time. Back to night he rarely allowed himself to revisit. It had been raining hard that night. The kind of rain that turned streets into mirrors and soaked through uniforms no matter how thick the fabric. The call had come in late, marked urgent. Domestic disturbance. Possible child involved. When they arrived at the apartment, shouting could be heard from outside. Backup moved in quickly. The handler had given the command and the dog had entered first, controlled and alert. Inside, chaos. Broken glass, overturned furniture, a man yelling, a woman crying. And then silence. The dog had stopped abruptly near the living room couch. The handler remembered thinking it was odd. The dog didn't bark, didn't signal threat. It simply lowered itself and refused to move. That was when they found her. A tiny child wedged into the narrow space behind the couch, knees pulled tight to her chest, eyes wide with terror. She hadn't made a sound. While officers handled the arrest, the handler had issued a single command: stay. The dog had obeyed. It lay beside the child, positioning its body between her and the rest of the room. The child had reached out with trembling fingers, touching the dog's fur as if to make sure it was real. The handler remembered how she had slowly leaned against the dog's side, and how she had stopped shaking. That memory had stayed with him longer than most calls, longer than arrests, longer than reports, but years had passed. The child had been placed with relatives. Life had moved on. Or so he thought. A soft sound pulled him back to the present. The girl had finally spoken. "He's the dog," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried. Several heads turned. The judge frowned slightly. "Excuse me." The woman beside the girl leaned down. "Honey, what did you say?" The girl didn't hesitate this time. "He stayed with me." The handler's heart skipped. The dog's breathing changed, just a little, slower, deeper. The judge raised a hand. "Officer," he said carefully, "does this child know your K9?" The handler took a breath. His instincts screamed at him to remain professional, to dismiss coincidence, but his experience told him otherwise. "I believe she might," he said slowly. Murmurs spread across the room. The judge leaned forward. "On what basis?" The handler hesitated, then spoke. "Several years ago, during a domestic response, my partner stayed with a child until she could be safely removed. That child would have been about her age." The girl nodded immediately, as if confirming the memory. "He didn't leave," she said. "He was warm." A hush fell over the courtroom. The handler felt his throat tighten. The dog's tail moved once, just once, slow, controlled. Protocol had been bent, but not broken. The judge exhaled slowly. "We will take a brief recess," he said. The gavel struck. People stood, voices erupting all at once. Some whispered, some stared openly, others wiped their eyes without realizing it. The handler knelt beside his dog, placing a steady hand on its back. "You remember," he murmured. The dog didn't look away from the child. Across the room, the girl finally looked down, noticing her teddy bear on the floor. She picked it up and hugged it again, but now her grip was loose, relaxed. Safe. Neither the dog nor the child knew what the rest of the day would bring. But both knew one thing. They had found each other again. And the quiet reaction that followed would soon change everything. The recess lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours to everyone in the courtroom. The spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering quietly to one another. The lawyers gathered their papers, and the judge walked to the bench, eyes never leaving the child and the dog. Yet even amid the murmurs, no one could ignore the silent connection that had formed. The little girl sat back down on the bench, her teddy bear clutched loosely. Her eyes, wide and thoughtful, never left the German shepherd. There was something deeper than curiosity in her gaze, a recognition that felt almost instinctual. To anyone else, it might have looked like a child pointing at a dog. To the handler and those who understood police K9s, it was a reunion across time. The dog, trained to respond to threats, to obey commands, and to remain disciplined in any situation, now displayed subtle, unusual behavior. Its tail moved just slightly, almost imperceptibly, a tiny sweep along the polished courtroom floor. Its ears twitched with awareness, and its head tilted gently, tracking the child's every movement. These were the small signs professionals watched for, subtle, yet unmistakable. Something about this child had reached the dog on a level no command could teach. The handler's mind wandered back to that rainy night years ago. He remembered how tense the officers had been, moving cautiously through the dark apartment, the smell of wet pavement and damp carpet lingering. The child had been wedged behind the couch, her tiny body trembling with fear. No one else had been able to calm her. Only the dog had stayed beside her, silent and steady, its body forming a protective shield between her and danger. She had reached out, pressed her small hand against its fur, and in that brief moment found comfort. It was a memory stamped in the dog's instincts, a bond invisible to the world but palpable in the air. Now, years later, that bond resurfaced. It wasn't just recognition, it was a calm, quiet acknowledgement, a bridge between past and present. The girl had no idea that the dog remembered her. She only knew she felt something familiar, something safe, something unshakable. Her small hand tightened around her teddy bear, not out of fear, but to steady herself as the magnitude of the moment pressed down. The courtroom held its breath. People had begun to notice the subtle tension, the extraordinary quiet. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer," he asked gently, "what exactly is happening here?" The handler exhaled. "Your Honor," he said slowly, "my partner, he's remembering someone he helped protect years ago. That child is here today." He nodded toward the little girl. "This is the same child he stayed with during a domestic emergency." Gasps echoed softly through the room. A few spectators whispered to one another. Some wiped eyes discreetly, overwhelmed by the human story unfolding in front of them. A child and a police dog, connected not by words but by memory and instinct, stood at the center of a tense courtroom, and yet somehow they reminded everyone present of the humanity behind the uniform. The girl leaned forward slightly, her small voice barely above a whisper. "He stayed with me," she said again. Her words were simple, almost fragile, yet carried the weight of memory and trust. She hadn't been able to articulate the full depth of her feeling all these years, but now, in this moment, she had found her voice. The German shepherd's eyes softened. Its breathing slowed, steady but profound. Every movement was controlled, restrained by training yet guided by instinct. The handler felt the bond as tangibly as the leash in his hand, a connection that transcended time and circumstance. He knelt slightly, speaking to the dog in low tones that only it could hear. "It's okay. You remember, it's safe." He glanced at the girl. She mirrored his calm, sensing safety even without understanding the technicalities. She was 4 years old, and yet in this room full of adults, she was the one anchoring the moment, the one who had rekindled a connection that even years of law enforcement procedure could not suppress. The judge, witnessing this silent exchange, allowed the moment to linger. He could have moved the proceedings along, urged the child to sit down, or commanded order, but something about the scene defied protocol. This wasn't a disruption. This was something rare, life speaking through instinct, memory, and recognition. He sat quietly, giving space for it to unfold. Meanwhile, the attorneys exchanged glances. This was no longer just a courtroom matter. This was living proof that sometimes law enforcement's most profound impact isn't recorded in evidence or testimony. It's felt in quiet acts of protection. The girl had been a victim once, scared and alone, and the dog had been her shield. Now, years later, that shield had returned, recognized her instantly, and reminded everyone present of the power of loyalty and trust. Outside, sunlight shifted across the courtroom floor. Dust motes glimmered in the golden light, but no one noticed. Their eyes were all on the quiet tableau at the center. People had come to see a trial. Instead, they were witnessing a reunion that spoke louder than words ever could. The girl finally took a small, deliberate step forward. She bent slightly to pick up her fallen teddy bear, but she didn't break eye contact with the dog. Her small fingers brushed the floor as she balanced, yet her focus remained unwavering. This was not a child lost in play. It was a child reconnecting with a presence she had once known as safety and warmth. The dog shifted slightly, moving only enough to maintain a position of calm attentiveness. Its eyes never left the girl. The handler, feeling the weight of the moment, kept his hand on the leash but loosened his grip slightly. He trusted his partner to act with perfect discretion, as it had all those years ago. Then the judge spoke again, his voice soft, careful. "We will take a short recess," he said. There was no need to explain further. Everyone understood. The moment was sacred in its own way. Legal proceedings could pause, evidence could wait. But human connection, especially one forged in fear, loyalty, and protection, was timeless. As the courtroom slowly emptied for the recess, some spectators lingered, pretending to stretch their legs but unable to look away. The little girl sat quietly, hugging her teddy bear again, while the dog remained composed, eyes fixed, ready for anything. The handler knelt next to his partner, murmuring quietly. The dog exhaled, steady, acknowledging without a single motion the invisible thread that had tied past and present together. For the girl, nothing else mattered. The courtroom had disappeared, leaving only the dog she remembered, the protector who had stayed beside her when the world had felt impossibly large and frightening. She didn't understand exactly how he knew her, or why he had remembered, or what would happen next. She only knew she felt safe, and that was enough. For the handler, it was a rare, humbling reminder of why he did what he did. The dog had saved lives before, enforced the law, apprehended criminals, and faced danger without hesitation. But here, in the quiet center of a small courtroom, it had done something perhaps even more remarkable. It had recognized innocence and returned it, unspoken, to a child who had long forgotten fear. Outside the courtroom, the murmur of activity continued, but inside, the world had contracted to a single moment. Time seemed suspended. The child and the dog were the only constants, and for those who watched, it was impossible not to feel the gravity of what they had just witnessed. And even as the recess ended and people prepared to return to their seats, the quiet understanding lingered. Something had shifted, not in the law, not in the testimony, not in the documents, but in the room itself. A reminder had been given. Loyalty, compassion, and memory can transcend years, distance, and circumstance. And sometimes they speak more loudly than any words, any verdict, or any official record. The girl leaned forward slightly again, hugging her teddy bear to her chest, and whispered softly, as if the dog alone could hear her, "I remember you too." The dog's ears twitched, a subtle acknowledgement, a recognition that went far beyond obedience. In that glance, they shared a language that no courtroom, no judge, and no law could contain. The trial would continue. Adults would speak. Witnesses would testify. But for that brief, extraordinary moment, everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something rare and sacred, a connection that time could not erase, a silent understanding that neither words nor age could diminish. And in the heart of a frightened little girl and a loyal police dog, the impossible had quietly, irrevocably happened. Years before that quiet courtroom, long before the gavel struck or legal papers were read, the world outside had been far darker, far scarier. It was late at night, the kind of night where the wind whistled through streets empty of life, and rain turned the asphalt slick and reflective. The city smelled of wet concrete, exhaust, and something faintly metallic. Every footstep echoed. Every movement seemed magnified in the darkness. The officer and his K-9 partner had responded to a domestic emergency call. The dispatcher's voice had been clipped, urgent, and the address sounded familiar to the officer, a neighborhood known for fast calls and volatile situations. The adrenaline that usually accompanied such calls hit immediately. But this time, there was something different, something in the pit of his stomach that told him this night would be remembered. The apartment they arrived at was chaotic even from the doorstep. Furniture knocked over, the door swinging in the wind. Voices angry, loud, desperate, filling the air like a storm contained indoors. Inside, the smell of smoke lingered faintly, and the carpet was damp from an old leak, giving off a musty scent. The officer crouched, giving the command, and his K9 entered first. Years of training ensured that the dog moved with precision, scanning every corner, every shadow. Yet when it reached the living room, it froze, not because of threat, not because of hesitation, but because it had sensed something small, hidden, vulnerable. Behind the couch, wedged into the narrow space between cushions and wall, sat a child. Tiny, trembling, eyes wide with fear. She hadn't made a sound. Her clothes were damp from spilled water, and her small hands clutched a ragged teddy bear, much like the one she would hold years later in the courtroom. She seemed almost transparent in the dim light, fragile as porcelain, and yet her presence radiated a silent, fragile plea. The K9 approached slowly, maintaining a calm, non-threatening posture. Its ears flicked back, eyes softening, body steady. The dog lowered itself beside the child, creating a protective barrier between her and the chaos that continued around them. The child's trembling lessened slightly, her hands brushing against the dog's fur. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The dog's presence was communication enough. The officer remembered that moment clearly. The way the dog lay beside her, its body tense yet comforting. Not a growl, not a bark, not a movement that could intimidate, only assurance. The child's head tilted toward the dog, her small body leaning against its side. Slowly, she stopped trembling. Slowly, her wide, fearful eyes began to soften. She felt safe for the first time that night, for the first time in what felt like forever. Time slowed. The chaos continued around them, the shouts, the arrests, the movement of officers, but in that small, dark space behind the couch, the world contracted. It was just the child and the dog. No uniforms, no laws, no commands, only trust, only safety. When the arrest was completed, the handler finally allowed himself to approach. He remembered how carefully he had guided the child from the room, how the dog stayed close, unwavering. She had leaned her small hand on the dog's fur, pressing lightly, almost as if to memorize it. The dog didn't move, didn't resist. It was as if it knew that this touch, this moment, would stay with her forever. The child didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply clung to the dog in silence, and the dog allowed it, understanding instinctively that protection sometimes required nothing but presence. That night, she had learned that some beings were safe. Some beings could be trusted implicitly. And the dog had learned, too, that loyalty extended beyond the call, beyond the mission, beyond time. The officer had filed his report, noted the child's name, age, and circumstances, and then life moved on. The child had been placed with family, away from that apartment, away from that night. The dog continued its work, facing criminals, detecting threats, and performing with unmatched discipline. But the memory of the small child behind the couch was etched deep within its instincts. It was filed not as a report, not as a case number, but as a quiet recognition of innocence. Years passed, assignments changed, calls became routine. The child grew in the care of others. The dog continued serving, and the officer never forgot the night, never forgot the silent bond formed in darkness. He didn't speak of it often. Few would understand. Yet sometimes, late at night in quiet moments, he would think of the child behind the couch, of the fear in her eyes, and of the dog who had stayed beside her without hesitation. Now years later, that night had returned, not in memory alone but in flesh and presence in the courtroom. The child, now a little older but still small, sat across from the dog she had never truly forgotten. She didn't know the dog remembered her. She didn't know that instinct and memory could transcend years. But she felt it. That same safety, that same quiet assurance filled her chest, just as it had long ago. The handler felt it too. Kneeling beside the dog, he whispered softly, words almost lost in the hum of the courthouse, "You remember her." The dog's tail twitched subtly. Its breathing remained steady. The recognition was silent but profound. Years of training, years of obedience, years of discipline, none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the bond forged in a small, dark apartment on a rainy night, renewed here, in public, in full view of everyone, yet understood fully by only three beings: the child, the dog, and the handler. Even as lawyers shuffled papers and the judge prepared to resume the trial, the energy in the room had shifted. The child no longer fidgeted. She hugged her teddy bear lightly, relaxed, her tiny frame holding a quiet strength she had only begun to understand. The dog remained poised, still and attentive, its eyes never leaving her. Time, distance, fear, and change had not diminished the connection. For the child, the K9 was more than a dog. It was a protector, a constant, a bridge between fear and comfort. For the dog, the child was more than a human being. She was a memory of trust, a living embodiment of the reason it had served, trained, and endured. And for the handler, it was a reminder of the invisible threads that bind us all, threads of courage, loyalty, and compassion that cannot be measured by reports or captured in evidence. As the judge called the court back to order, the three remained connected in their own quiet world. Witnesses would testify, legal arguments would unfold, but this moment, the reunion of a child and a dog across years of separation and fear, would linger far longer than any verdict. The world outside might see a routine courtroom scene, a minor pause, or a child pointing at a dog. But those who understood recognized the extraordinary. The invisible bond had been honored, remembered, and renewed in silence. And in that silence, a promise was made, not in words but in instinct, protection, loyalty, memory, recognition. The kind of bond that survives chaos, time, and distance, waiting for the moment when it can quietly, unmistakably reveal itself again. The courtroom had returned to its usual rhythm, or at least it tried to. Lawyers shuffled papers, witnesses whispered to their attorneys, and the judge adjusted his glasses, preparing to resume the day's proceedings. But nothing felt normal anymore. A subtle tension had settled over the room, a quiet awareness that something extraordinary was happening in the center of all the formalities. The little girl remained seated, her small frame poised with an intensity that belied her age. Her teddy bear rested gently in her lap, but her eyes never left the police dog. It was more than curiosity now. It was focus, recognition, and an unspoken dialogue that no adult in the room could fully understand. The handler watched carefully. Years of experience told him to remain professional, to maintain control over both his partner and the proceedings. Yet with every subtle movement, the dog's ears twitching, the slight shift in its stance, the calm, deliberate gaze, the handler felt something stir within him, a memory he hadn't allowed himself to dwell on in years. It clicked suddenly, like a key turning in a lock. The handler realized the truth. He remembered that night, the emergency call, the chaotic apartment, the child wedged behind the couch. He remembered the fear in her eyes, the trembling in her tiny body, the desperate clutch of her hands around a worn, stuffed animal. He remembered giving the command, letting the dog approach slowly, and the way the child had leaned against the K9, finding comfort in its presence. The realization hit him fully. This little girl, the one sitting quietly in the courtroom now, was the same child his dog had stayed with years ago, the same one who had found safety in the dog's unwavering presence. A lump formed in the handler's throat. Professionalism demanded he suppress it, but he couldn't. Not fully. He looked at the child again, now more clearly than ever, and noticed the faint, subconscious ways she mirrored that moment from years ago. Her posture, the way she clutched her teddy bear, the way her eyes held the same cautious intensity. He quietly spoke to the judge, leaning in slightly so only the court official could hear. "Your Honor, I believe my partner recognizes this child. She is the same child from a domestic emergency call years ago. My K9 stayed with her while we secured the scene." A hush fell across the courtroom. Observers craned their necks, lawyers paused, and even the judge's hand froze mid-paper shuffle. The magnitude of what had just been revealed began to sink in. This wasn't simply a child pointing at a dog. This was a reunion, a recognition that crossed time, distance, and years of life's changes. The little girl's lips parted slightly, as though sensing the weight of what had just been said. "He stayed with me," she whispered, barely audible to the humans nearby, but perfectly clear to the dog. The German shepherd remained composed, its training evident, yet its eyes softened and its tail twitched subtly. It was acknowledgement, not play, not command, not attention-seeking, pure recognition, the kind that only comes from memory anchored in deep instinct. The courtroom felt transformed. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, some eyes widening, some blinking rapidly. The attorneys, though professionals, looked on with subtle amazement. Even the judge paused, letting the quiet gravity of the situation settle over the proceedings. The handler knelt slightly next to the dog, giving a reassuring pat. "It's okay, partner. You remember," he murmured. The dog exhaled once, slow and steady, and the slight flick of its tail confirmed it. Memory and loyalty had endured, unbroken by time, waiting for this very moment. Meanwhile, the little girl seemed to relax subtly. Her chest rose and fell in steadier breaths. She looked at the dog not with fear, not with hesitation, but with trust. It was as if she were returning to a safe place she hadn't consciously remembered but had always carried within her. The judge allowed a brief pause, giving space for the child to adjust. The attorneys whispered quietly among themselves, understanding that this moment was extraordinary, but choosing not to disturb it. The spectators, once focused solely on legal proceedings, now watched with soft awe. It was a quiet, profound reminder of humanity amidst structure, of loyalty and instinct bridging the gap between innocence and discipline. The handler reflected on the significance. His partner, the dog, had saved countless lives over the years, criminal apprehensions, searches, protection during dangerous calls. But here, in this courtroom, its impact was measured differently. This was proof of the quiet, often invisible ways law enforcement touches lives, not with weapons or commands, but with presence, instinct, and loyalty. The little girl finally leaned forward slightly, adjusting her grip on her teddy bear. "I remember you," she said softly, though this time she spoke directly to the dog. Her words carried across the short distance, clear, genuine, and filled with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. The dog shifted slightly, only enough to reposition for comfort and attentiveness. Its eyes never left hers. The handler's chest tightened with emotion. Years of service had taught him control, but no training could suppress the profound impact of this reunion. Outside the courtroom, the sun had shifted, sending beams of light through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the warm glow. To an observer, it might have seemed ordinary. But inside, the light fell across a scene that was extraordinary in every sense. A child reunited, unspokenly, with the protector who had stayed with her when fear was overwhelming, when chaos had reigned, and when hope had felt distant. The little girl's voice broke the lingering silence again. "You stayed until I was safe," she said, her words carrying the weight of memory, trust, and a bond no one else could fully understand. The handler nodded quietly. "Yes," he whispered, "that's exactly what happened." The courtroom absorbed this silently. No applause, no rush of acknowledgement, only the recognition that some moments cannot be fully captured in words. The K-9 had fulfilled its duty, and in doing so had left an invisible mark on a life. Now, years later, that mark was returning, manifesting in wide eyes, small hands, and a heartbeat of trust. The judge finally broke the silence. "Let's take a short recess," he said, but even as the gavel struck, no one moved immediately. They lingered, hesitant to break the quiet magic of the moment. Spectators, officers, and attorneys alike felt the weight of the connection that had unfolded before them. The handler knelt beside the dog once more, whispering softly, "You remember her. You kept your promise." The dog exhaled, calm, steady, and vigilant, its own way of affirming the bond. The little girl adjusted her teddy bear and looked at the dog again, recognition and relief shining across her small face. In that brief, sacred pause, the courtroom's purpose shifted. Legal proceedings, rules, and testimony were secondary. The moment was about recognition, loyalty, and the power of silent guardianship. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something rare, a bond unbroken by time, trauma, or circumstance. And while the trial would resume, while arguments would be made and evidence examined, this part of the story, the reunion of a child and a K-9 who had saved her, would linger far longer than any legal document, far longer than any verdict. It would remain in the minds of those who witnessed it, a testament to loyalty, memory, and the quiet heroism that exists beyond uniform and law. The little girl finally relaxed completely, breathing evenly, her hands resting gently on her teddy bear. The dog remained poised, steady, and alert, yet the tension of instinctive memory had softened into calm assurance. The handler allowed himself a rare, small smile, realizing the full depth of what had just occurred. Some bonds, he thought, are invisible, intangible, and yet unbreakable. And sometimes they reveal themselves when the world least expects it, in the quietest moments, in the most ordinary of places, like a courtroom on an ordinary day. The child and the dog had found each other again, and for everyone watching, it was impossible not to feel the gravity of that connection. It was more than recognition. It was proof that some acts of protection, love, and loyalty are timeless. The courtroom was no longer just a room of procedure and formalities. It had changed subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The polished wooden benches, the rows of stern faces, the cold metallic gavel, everything that had once felt rigid and detached now seemed to hum with a quiet, almost sacred energy. Every person present was aware that what they were witnessing was extraordinary, and it was impossible to look away. The little girl remained seated, small and composed, her teddy bear clutched loosely in her lap. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the German shepherd at the front of the room. The dog mirrored her focus, maintaining perfect stillness but with a subtle softness in its gaze. There was no command. There was no expectation. There was simply recognition, a connection that had endured across years, built in a chaotic night long forgotten by most but never forgotten by them. The handler watched closely, kneeling slightly beside his partner, a hand resting gently on the leash. His mind raced, recalling every detail from that night years ago, the frightened child hiding behind a couch, the chaos swirling around them, the sense of helplessness that had hung in the apartment like smoke. He remembered giving the command to the dog to stay, to maintain calm, and how the child had reached out instinctively, pressing against the dog's fur, her tears finally ceasing. That single act of trust had become etched in the K-9's memory, a bond deeper than training, deeper than instinct. And now, in this courtroom, that bond was manifesting again. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the silence, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "This is unusual," he admitted, pausing as he surveyed the scene. "But we will allow it. The courtroom will observe the situation quietly." Attorneys exchanged glances, some nodding subtly. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, captivated, unsure whether to consider this part of the trial or something entirely outside it. Every adult present seemed to instinctively understand that this was bigger than the case being tried. It was about human connection, about compassion, and about recognition that transcended years and circumstance. The little girl adjusted her teddy bear and whispered softly, "You stayed with me." Her voice carried across the short distance to the dog, clear yet fragile. The German shepherd's tail gave a subtle sweep, the smallest movement, almost imperceptible to those unfamiliar with canine behavior. But to the handler and the girl, it was monumental. It was acknowledgement, recognition, and reassurance, all at once. The girl's lips curved into a tentative smile. She hadn't smiled in the courtroom before, not like this. Something inside her had shifted. Fear had melted into comfort. Anxiety had become trust. She didn't fully understand why she felt this way, only that it was familiar, safe, and undeniable. The handler allowed himself a small exhale, steadying his own emotions. He had seen fear, courage, and loyalty countless times in the field, but the scene before him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. No arrest, no rescue, no tactical maneuver could match this moment's raw, unspoken intensity. The courtroom atmosphere continued to transform. Spectators leaned forward, whispering softly, as though speaking aloud might shatter the fragile, perfect connection unfolding before them. Some wiped at their eyes discreetly, touched by the profound simplicity of trust between a child and a dog. It was a quiet lesson in empathy and loyalty that no legal precedent could ever teach. Even the judge softened visibly, leaning forward on the bench with his hands clasped. For a moment, he wasn't a figure of authority. He was a witness to something rare, something delicate, something that transcended rules and procedures. He allowed the moment to linger, giving space for the child and the dog to acknowledge each other fully. The little girl spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, yet strong with certainty. "I remember when you stayed." Her words were simple, but the weight of them filled the entire room. She didn't need to elaborate. She didn't need to explain. The dog understood, as if memory alone could bridge the gap between the years that had passed. The German shepherd shifted slightly, resting its head a fraction lower, eyes locked on the girl. Its presence was calm yet unwavering. Its loyalty was undeniable, a silent promise that it had remembered, that it had honored the trust she had placed in it long ago. The handler knelt, speaking softly. "It's okay, partner. She's safe now. You did your job." The dog's ears twitched, acknowledging the words without breaking composure. Its body remained steady, trained yet instinctively protective. For the girl, this was more than recognition. It was closure. The trauma of that long-ago night, the fear, and the sense of helplessness were all subtly soothed by the presence of the one creature that had offered protection when nothing else could. She felt a warmth spread across her chest, a reassurance that someone, somewhere, had always watched over her. The courtroom, too, seemed to feel the shift. People had come expecting testimony, evidence, and arguments. Instead, they had witnessed something intangible yet profound, the reunion of trust, the demonstration of loyalty, and a living testament to the power of instinct and memory. The tension in the room softened, replaced by awe, respect, and a deep, shared empathy for the quiet connection at its center. The little girl reached out slightly, careful not to break decorum, but enough to acknowledge the dog's presence. She touched her teddy bear lightly against her chest, leaning just enough toward the K9 to convey her recognition. The dog remained motionless, yet it responded in the only way it could, through calm attention, steady presence, and unwavering focus. The handler's chest tightened. Years of service had taught him discipline, control, and restraint, but moments like this reminded him of the human side of law enforcement. The quiet impact, the lives touched beyond the reports, and the bonds that were invisible to most yet unbreakable in reality. The judge's voice broke the silence once more. "We will proceed with caution," he said, his tone gentler than before. "The testimony will continue, but let us respect what is happening here." The attorneys nodded and witnesses took their seats, aware of the extraordinary scene unfolding in front of them. The courtroom resumed its function, yet the atmosphere remained transformed. Every word, every action was now filtered through the lens of what had been silently witnessed: the reunion, the recognition, the unspoken bond between a child and a protector who had remembered. The girl's small hand remained near her teddy bear, her eyes never leaving the German shepherd. She had found a sense of safety that she hadn't realized she had been longing for, a quiet validation that the world could still hold care, protection, and loyalty, even in places governed by rules, formality, and distance. The dog, still poised, exhaled slowly, a signal of calm and attentiveness. Its tail twitched once, small but deliberate. It did not move toward the child, nor did it break its disciplined position, yet it communicated everything that words could not: recognition, loyalty, protection, and memory. The handler watched, a sense of humility washing over him. The dog had fulfilled its duty countless times through arrests, searches, rescues, but nothing compared to this. This was beyond obedience, beyond procedure, beyond expectation. This was instinct, memory, and empathy converging in a single, profound moment. Outside, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the courtroom floor. Dust motes shimmered in the golden beams, unnoticed by most, yet the light seemed to highlight the child, the dog, and the quiet power of the bond between them. It was as if the universe itself had paused to acknowledge this moment of recognition, trust, and healing. The girl whispered once more, softly, almost reverently, "You kept me safe." The dog's head tilted slightly, its eyes unwavering. It had kept its promise, though the years had passed. The handler exhaled, placing a steady hand on the dog's back. "Yes," he murmured, "you were safe." For everyone watching, the courtroom had transformed from a place of legal procedure to a sanctuary of human connection. Witnesses, jurors, attorneys, and even the judge felt it, an emotional shift so subtle yet profound that it could not be ignored. The scene was a reminder of the quiet heroism that often goes unseen, the acts of loyalty and protection that leave invisible but indelible marks on lives. The child and the dog shared one last long, silent glance. Words were unnecessary. Recognition was enough. Memory, instinct, and trust had bridged years and circumstance, creating a bond unbroken by time, trauma, or distance. And in that moment, the courtroom understood something fundamental. Some connections are beyond logic, beyond training, beyond expectation. They exist quietly, deeply, and irrevocably, waiting for the moment when they can reveal themselves, not with fanfare, but with undeniable truth. The courtroom had become a theater of subtle emotion, where silence carried weight and glances told stories that words never could. The trial continued, legal procedures moving forward, but no one truly noticed the formalities anymore. Every eye in the room remained drawn to the 4-year-old girl and the German shepherd, bound by a connection invisible to the rest of the world yet undeniable in its intensity. The girl shifted slightly on the bench, her small hands clutching the teddy bear loosely now. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving the dog. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, then closed again, caught in the gravity of the moment. She did not need to speak. Her presence alone communicated the trust she felt, the recognition she remembered but had never fully understood until this day. The dog, trained for obedience, vigilance, and control, responded not to command but to instinct. Its body remained perfectly still, yet every fiber of its being seemed attuned to her movements, her breathing, her heartbeat. Its ears twitched at the slightest sound she made. Its eyes softened with a warmth reserved for those it had once protected. Years of training had taught the dog to follow orders, but memory had taught it something far deeper. The handler knelt beside his partner, whispering softly, more to reassure himself than the dog. "It's okay. She's here. You remember her." The dog exhaled slowly, a deep, deliberate breath that carried years of discipline, loyalty, and instinct into that single moment. It was acknowledgement, affirmation, and a promise kept, all wrapped into one. The little girl took a small, deliberate step forward, inching closer to the dog without breaking decorum. Her teddy bear slipped slightly in her grasp, but she did not notice. She was focused entirely on the dog, the protector who had stayed with her during a night of fear she could barely recall consciously. The courtroom seemed to fade away around her, the papers, the gavel, the whispers of attorneys, all irrelevant in the presence of this living memory. A gentle murmur passed through the spectators. Some leaned forward, captivated. Others wiped their eyes discreetly, moved by the raw emotion in front of them. Even the judge paused, observing the scene with a quiet reverence. For a moment, the courtroom ceased to be a place of legal procedure. It had become a sanctuary of loyalty, memory, and trust. The girl knelt slightly, bringing herself to eye level with the dog. Her voice trembled softly as she whispered, "You stayed with me, and now I'm here." Her words, fragile but deliberate, carried across the few feet separating her from the K9. It was a statement of recognition, a declaration that she remembered and, more importantly, that she understood the depth of the bond between them. The dog shifted ever so slightly, moving closer within its trained position, a subtle acknowledgement of the girl's words. Its eyes locked onto hers with a focus so intense it seemed to pierce the veil of years. It was not obedience. It was memory. Not instinct alone, but the deep, unspoken understanding that they had shared before and were sharing again now. The handler watched, heart pounding, overwhelmed by the convergence of past and present. He had seen countless rescues, arrests, and emergency responses, yet none had carried the quiet emotional weight of this moment. This was not a call, not a mission, not an assignment. This was something profoundly human, witnessed through the lens of a child and a dog, linked by trust, memory, and love that required no words. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Time, once rigid and measured, felt suspended. Every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every distant cough was muted compared to the quiet intensity at the center of the room. Spectators could feel it, the invisible thread connecting the child and the dog, stretching across years of separation, trauma, and uncertainty. The little girl extended her hand, hesitant but resolute. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. The dog's ears flicked slightly, its body remaining motionless but tense in awareness. It had been through fear, chaos, and unpredictability countless times, yet in that moment it recognized the depth of her trust. She had survived the night that had once threatened her safety, and now she reaffirmed it, standing bravely before the one creature that had protected her without hesitation. The handler exhaled slowly, placing his hand on the dog's back. "Good boy," he murmured, voice tight with emotion. "You remembered her." The dog exhaled as well, calm but aware, its tail giving a subtle sweep in affirmation. Years of service, countless calls, and countless lives saved had led to this singular moment, the ultimate acknowledgement of loyalty and connection. The little girl's eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and joy. She hugged her teddy bear to her chest, but it was clear that her focus had shifted entirely. She wasn't clinging for comfort anymore. She was recognizing safety, loyalty, and care embodied in the presence of the dog before her. The judge, moved beyond what he could articulate, allowed the courtroom to pause. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else present, the importance of the moment unfolding before him. Legal proceedings, rules, and decorum were secondary now. Human connection had taken precedence. "Everyone, please remain seated," he said softly, though not out of command. It was an invitation to observe, to witness, to acknowledge, and everyone did. Witnesses, jurors, attorneys, and spectators alike watched silently, fully aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The girl's voice broke the quiet again. "You didn't leave me," she said, her words carrying both wonder and gratitude. She had never thought about those few minutes behind the couch in terms of heroism or duty. She had only felt safety. And now, years later, that feeling had returned, palpable and undeniable. The dog exhaled, steady and deliberate. Its eyes remained fixed on her, soft and unwavering. It did not move closer, did not seek affection. It simply acknowledged. This was the language of trust and memory, silent, profound, and absolute. The handler felt a lump in his throat. He had served beside this dog for years, witnessing obedience, courage, and discipline in countless situations. Yet this quiet recognition, this reunion, this emotional resonance, was unlike anything he had experienced. He placed a steady hand on the dog's back, grounding himself as much as the animal, silently marveling at the bond that had endured years and distance. The courtroom remained still, the gavel untouched. Even as legal proceedings were set to continue, the energy in the room had shifted irrevocably. The child and the dog had reminded everyone present of something essential, that loyalty, compassion, and recognition exist beyond commands, rules, or circumstance. They exist in memory, in instinct, and in the quiet moments that demand no fanfare. The little girl finally smiled, small and tentative at first, then broader as her relief and recognition swelled. She reached toward the dog slightly, hesitant, almost afraid to break the delicate balance. The dog responded in its own subtle way, moving a fraction closer, head lowered slightly, eyes locked on hers. The handler whispered one last time softly, as if marking the culmination of a long-held promise. "You remembered, she knows. You kept your word." The dog's subtle tail sweep confirmed it, the quietest acknowledgement of a bond that had survived years of separation, fear, and change. In that moment, the child and the dog had achieved something extraordinary. They had crossed the invisible distance of years, reaffirming trust, protection, and memory. The courtroom, transformed by their quiet power, had witnessed the impossible made real, not through force, not through argument, but through loyalty and recognition that transcended time. The world outside could continue as it always had. The trial would proceed. Papers would be filed. Legal arguments would continue. But inside that room, for everyone present, the story of a 4-year-old girl and a police dog would linger far longer than any verdict. It was a story of courage, loyalty, and the quiet heroism that exists beyond the limits of human understanding. The little girl hugged her teddy bear tighter, her small body radiating relief, trust, and joy. The dog remained steady, poised, yet softer than it had been at the trial's start, its focus unwavering. And the handler, kneeling beside them, allowed himself a rare, deep exhale, overwhelmed by the quiet majesty of what had just unfolded. They had found each other again. Years of separation, fear, and uncertainty had not broken the bond. And in the stillness of the courtroom, everyone present understood something profound. Some connections cannot be severed. Some promises cannot be forgotten. Some acts of loyalty transcend time, circumstance, and even words. The courtroom settled into a tense, yet reverent silence. The trial, with its legal documents, testimonies, and arguments, had become secondary. All eyes were on the quiet interaction at the front. A little girl, clutching her teddy bear, and a German Shepherd police dog, poised and disciplined, yet softened by memory. Years had passed since that stormy night behind a couch, yet the connection between them had not wavered. The handler knelt beside the dog, hand steady on its back. He glanced toward the judge, who offered a subtle nod. No one needed instructions. Everyone understood that what was happening transcended words, law, or protocol. Recognition was unfolding, a reunion not rehearsed, not commanded, and not fully understood by anyone outside this silent circle of trust. The girl leaned forward slightly, eyes wide and glistening. "You stayed," she whispered again, voice barely audible but powerful in its quiet truth. "You stayed with me when I was scared." She pressed her small palms together, almost as if the act of speaking the memory aloud would solidify it into the present. The dog's ears flicked, its body remaining calm and disciplined, yet its gaze softened. Tail swished subtly, a silent acknowledgement. No barks, no gestures, no movement beyond what was necessary for controlled poise, but every observer could feel the depth of the bond. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Spectators leaned forward, some gripping benches or clutching hands, moved by the profound simplicity of trust between a child and a creature trained for service and protection. The story unfolding before them, a story of loyalty and recognition across years, was far more compelling than any legal argument they had anticipated witnessing. The handler whispered, softly enough that only the dog could hear, "You remembered her. She knows you were there." The dog exhaled, a long, deliberate breath, as though confirming the bond it had preserved over time. Its training, courage, and instincts had all culminated in this single act, silent recognition and unwavering protection renewed. The girl's face brightened slightly. Relief, recognition, and gratitude intermingled in her small features. She hugged her teddy bear tightly, but it was clear that her focus had shifted to the dog before her. She took a careful step forward, then another, bridging the short distance that had existed between them for years. Each movement was measured but deliberate, a child finding comfort and connection she hadn't consciously realized she had been seeking for so long. The German Shepherd remained in position, poised, disciplined, yet its eyes followed her every movement with unwavering focus. It did not approach, did not leap, did not make a single sound. Its loyalty, memory, and instinct spoke louder than any motion ever could. Years of training had ensured obedience, but memory had forged understanding, a deeper, unspoken dialogue that connected past and present. The judge, observing quietly, allowed the scene to unfold without interruption. His gavel rested unused. Legal matters had been put on pause, and in that moment the courtroom had become something entirely different. A witness to profound empathy, recognition, and trust between human and animal. The little girl knelt down carefully, hugging her teddy bear to her chest, and spoke again. "I wasn't afraid when you were there," she said softly, "because I knew you wouldn't let anything hurt me." Her words, though whispered, carried across the room with startling clarity. The dog's head tilted slightly, ears flicking, eyes locking with hers. Recognition passed silently between them, a bond renewed and acknowledged without ceremony. The handler felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had seen fear, bravery, and loyalty countless times in his career, yet nothing compared to this moment. No arrest, no rescue, no award could match the emotional resonance of a child, and a K9 reunited through memory, instinct, and unwavering trust. Spectators wiped their eyes discreetly, and jurors shifted in their seats, captivated. Attorneys exchanged glances, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. The trial had become secondary, the human story primary. Everyone understood that they were witnessing an act of quiet heroism, loyalty, and trust that transcended words and formal procedures. The girl finally stood fully, taking a careful step closer to the dog. Her teddy bear slipped slightly, and she adjusted it with a small smile, her courage and recognition evident. She reached out her small hand, not expecting the dog to move, but hoping it would sense her intention. The dog's eyes followed the movement. It did not approach, yet its gaze softened, ears flicking subtly. It acknowledged her, recognized her, and reaffirmed the bond they had shared all those years ago. The handler whispered gently, "It's okay. She's here now. You did your job. You kept her safe." The dog exhaled deliberately, still calm and poised, yet undeniably engaged. For the girl, this was the culmination of a memory that had lingered in fragments: fear, anxiety, and the faint recollection of a presence that had kept her safe. Now, she could reconcile it fully, face to face. The trauma of that night was not erased, but it was soothed by recognition, memory, and the assurance that she had been protected when it mattered most. The judge allowed the courtroom to breathe. Proceedings could resume, but for a moment everyone remained still, captivated by the extraordinary bond. It was a lesson in humanity, courage, and loyalty, unspoken, yet undeniable. The handler took a deep breath. Years of service had taught him control, discipline, and composure, but the pride he felt in this moment was different. This was not a medal, not a commendation, not recognition from superiors. This was a quiet, pure validation of the work he and his partner had done when it mattered most, not to the law, but to a vulnerable child. The girl knelt slightly again, hugging her teddy bear to her chest, and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." Her voice was fragile, filled with awe, gratitude, and relief. The dog's eyes remained locked on her, tail swishing subtly in acknowledgement. It had preserved the memory of protection, loyalty, and comfort. It had kept its word, even without comprehension of time or consequence. Spectators began to whisper among themselves quietly. Some were moved to tears. Some could only marvel in silence. The courtroom, once filled with rigid order, had become a place of profound empathy. The child and the dog had reminded everyone present that loyalty, trust, and compassion are timeless and cannot be measured solely by words, commands, or actions. The handler finally allowed himself to smile, kneeling beside his partner. "You did it," he murmured softly, pride and emotion blending in his voice. "You remembered and you kept her safe." The dog exhaled, calm but deliberate, its gaze still fixed on the girl. The little girl, feeling the full weight of recognition and safety, hugged her teddy bear once more and whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." That simple statement carried with it the resolution of years of fear, uncertainty, and trauma, replaced now by trust, comfort, and connection. For the courtroom, the trial would continue. Evidence would be presented, legal arguments made, and procedures followed. But nothing could erase the moment that had just unfolded, the reunion of a child and a dog across years, bridged by memory, instinct, and loyalty. The dog, still poised and disciplined, remained a sentinel of calm, a reminder of the quiet heroism that often goes unseen. The handler, kneeling beside it, understood fully the magnitude of what had transpired. And the little girl, small yet radiant with trust and recognition, carried forward a memory that would stay with her forever, a memory of protection, loyalty, and the knowledge that even in fear, she was never truly alone. The judge cleared his throat gently, finally acknowledging the return to procedure. "We may continue," he said softly, yet the courtroom had been transformed. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, the rekindling of a bond that transcended time, circumstance, and human comprehension. The little girl smiled one last time, small but genuine, and whispered to the dog, "I'll remember you too." The dog's ears flicked, tail swished subtly, and in that silent exchange the story reached its full circle. Recognition had been shared, trust had been reaffirmed, and the bond forged on a dark, rainy night years ago had endured. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the world outside could proceed as it always had, but inside the courtroom, everyone had witnessed something timeless. The power of loyalty, memory, and love that speaks louder than words, commands, or formalities, a bond between a child and a dog that would never be broken. The little girl hugged her teddy bear one final time and looked at the dog. Her eyes sparkled with understanding and gratitude. The dog remained steady, disciplined, yet softer than it had been at the trial's start. The handler allowed himself a rare, quiet sigh of relief, marveling at the unspoken story they had all witnessed. Some bonds, he knew, are eternal. Some acts of protection cannot be measured. And some connections, like the one between this child and this K9, endure across years, reminding everyone present that loyalty, trust, and love exist beyond time, beyond words, and beyond circumstance. The courtroom returned to its business, but the echoes of that reunion lingered in every heart present, a testament to the quiet heroism of a police dog, the resilience of a child, and the extraordinary power of memory, trust, and love. And in the center of it all, the child, the dog, and the handler shared a final, silent acknowledgement. The past had been honored, the bond renewed, and the promise kept. The story, though complete, would live on in every glance, every heartbeat, and every unspoken memory, forever etched in the minds of those who had witnessed it.